is that in the end, when there is broad consensus, what we would call sufficient consensus, a declaration should be adopted, and it should take all of us forward without failing to adopt a declaration. And we would like this to be the new practice that the G20 countries will have, that no country or no dissenting voice should hold us back once there is broad and what we would call sufficient consensus. And of course, the other important aspect of what Brazil has achieved is to focus on issues such as taxation of the ultra and super rich, to start a process of seeing how those can be brought to pay enhanced taxes. They, in their own research, came about with a number of 3,000, the richest, super richest people in the world. And so all that will be developed into some framework at national level. We will see how best that works, but I think it's still something that's in the works. And also the reform of global institutions, both governance institutions as well as financial institutions. So focus on climate change was also at a focus level, which we thanked Brazil for. So overall, this has been a very successful G20 summit, and it lays a very good foundation for us as South Africa, as we now focus on having the next G20 summit in Johannesburg, South Africa. I took time to welcome all of those participating countries, both as members and invited countries, and including international organizations, to come to South Africa, to Johannesburg, to participate. Our theme is going to be focused on the issue of solidarity, equality and sustainable development. And we're going to have key priorities that we want to focus on that will go towards supporting the various broad themes that we have come up with. So we do expect that we will have a successful summit in Johannesburg, and we're really glad that many countries that were here are keen and willing to come and support us as we lead up to the summit in Johannesburg. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Can I go home now?
Not yet. I'll come to you, Vivian. If we go by seniority, should we start with you, Voyo?
Say one question.
Yes, one question.
Voyo always has many questions.
The first bilateral we had with the President was with the post-President Lula. I'm wondering whether, how to phrase it differently, but whether there were any brotherly confessions as to what frustrated him the most during his presidency, that which we should look out for.
Minister, why don't you come and sit here, because you are going to answer all the questions, because you were centrally involved.
If I had time, I was also going to ask whether, or just how friendly were you in your conversations as heads of state and government. And the reason I'm asking this, that only yesterday I was watching the British Prime Minister sitting right in front of the Chinese President, talking openly and frankly about the issues they raised forthrightly with them, like China's human rights record and the like. And it made me wonder whether, in fact, behind the scenes you actually had frank and open discussions, and whether you could give examples of those.
Welcome, Minister. We had a number of bilaterals as South Africa with a number of countries. Obviously, the host country, Brazil, being one of those. And our bilateral touched on a number of issues around which we cooperate. We are both countries of the Global South. We are both members of BRICS. and also members of IPSA, which is India, Brazil, South Africa. So we are joined at many joints of the hip, and we work together extremely well. President Lula felt that Brazil had achieved quite a lot of the objectives that it sought to achieve, particularly on the reform of global institutions. This broad agreement is emerging, and as well as the financial institutions. And his focus was on the issue of poverty and hunger, how best we can all work to eliminate poverty and hunger, and also on workers' rights. So in the main, our bilateral with President Lula was more about the convergence of our own objectives as two countries, and also his wish to come to South Africa so that we can extend our discussions. And of course, the issue of trade between our two countries was also raised, that we need to upscale the trade and get South African companies also coming to export here, and of course Brazilian companies export quite a lot from food and machinery and all that to us. So those were good talks. And on an overall basis with various other leaders, yes, there's always an opportunity to have frank discussions about geopolitical issues, some of them quite testing and touching, such as what is happening in Palestine, in Gaza particularly, in the Middle East, and Ukraine, and we were able to exchange views and thoughts about that, and many of the inputs that were made in the plenary session also touched on those issues. And I would argue that there was just no avoidance of the key and thorny issues in our discussions, and that is why I would say that this was a really good summit, because even those who held different views, who either dissented and felt that there were red lines, were able to articulate their views, and we were able to absorb and sometimes accommodate their views in the finalization of the declaration. And so the declaration as it stands and adopted really encapsulates the thoughts and the views of all of us, save for one country that felt that they'd like to dissociate themselves from some of the issues. However, they would not stand in the way of the adoption of the declaration, which, in our view, we take a very good leaf from that and say, this is the way we should work. No country should, as I said earlier, see itself as being a showstopper or blocking progress to the adoption of declarations, but they should feel free to express their views as one country did. And that is what constitutes what I call a really good summit indeed.
Thank you, President. Vivian?
Hi, Mr. President. My name is Vivian Oswald. I work at the Brazilian paper, Valor Econômico. South Africa will be the less developing country in charge for the G20 before the presidency goes to the US again. Lula has had to lead the G20 with Biden's US. You are going to deal with Trump. Is this way of making the declaration that we did here, we saw that Argentina wouldn't accept it, the way that you're going to do with the US in case Trump doesn't accept climate change things and other issues that he's against? And regarding digital platforms, do you consider it as well an issue for South Africa during your presidency?
Yes, the good thing, if I use a colloquial term and say the beauty about this summit, is that it allowed everyone, as I said, to express their views and to also articulate dissenting views or voices on issues. And what we established at this summit is that even as one member or country dissents, it will not stop the show. It will not stop forward movement. And we say this advisedly, utilizing a South African concept which says, once there is sufficient consensus, you move on. However, building consensus must include being able to listen to dissenting views, to seek to accommodate those dissenting views, and to debate issues and to go behind every aspect that people disagree on. And once the broad consensus has been reached, and we often find that even those who may well have doubts are then brought into the consensus, and then it becomes sufficient for us to move forward. And we think that this beautifully crafted South African dialogue, managing and breaking concept, dispute resolution concept, can work very well. And today at this summit we saw it working very well. So in the future, those countries that may have different views will be granted the right, the opportunity to voice their views, and if the broad majority agrees, we decide and declare and move forward. When it comes to digital technologies, particularly the evolution of artificial intelligence, it is one of our key priorities. As South Africa, we've got the 3 themes, and then the sub-themes, if you like, or the key priorities will include things like ending hunger, climate change, and dealing with the climate damage, as well as a whole number of others, including digital technology, but specifically artificial intelligence. And we will want to address this as it should really lead to the development of people. It must be people-oriented, it must benefit people, and it must lead to the development and growth of our economies.
My name is just how much pressure is South Africa under to get over the line some of the key reforms that the Global South has been pushing for, given that it is the last rotation of countries from that region? And linked to that, before you hand over to the US, that's President Donald Trump, what is your approach to it? Do you think that maybe you can find each other as former businessmen? Is there a Gulf diplomacy aspect that could be at play here?
Well, we're not really under pressure in South Africa, as we're going to be heading the G20. We approach our task as being a task where we work together with others. So whatever pressure we may be facing is a pressure that is exerted on us by the conditions in which people in the world find themselves in, particularly people in the global south. Poverty, inequality, and joblessness. Those are the pressures that, yes, we are under, which we've got to address. And we want to address this under the rubric of G20, so that even countries in the global north are able to work with us. Hence, we've crafted the theme of solidarity. We want to live up to the principle of cooperation, which was crafted 19 years ago or so when the G20 was formed, that we must cooperate and work together to achieve ideals that will lead to economic stability, economic growth. And that's the pressure that we are exerting on ourselves to address, in our case, this triple challenge and sustainable development broadly, and also have a measure of equal treatment on a whole range of issues, from climate change to financing of development, where currently your more developing economy countries are paying more for their debt, and they've got huge debt burdens, and we would like the inequality that persists in that area to be addressed. So therefore, the G20 is an important platform. It accounts for almost 80% of the GDP of the world and 80% or so of global trade. So it's important that this platform be utilized to good effect. I look forward to working with President Trump. He's going to be part of the Troika in the form of the United States, South Africa, and Brazil. So we have to work together. We are joined at the hip as we prepare both for the South African G20 Summit, and they also prepare in the following year for the US G20. So we're going to be working together for a solid 2 years, if not 3. So I'm hoping that diplomacy and observing, the various protocols that exist amongst global leaders as well as countries are going to underpin the way that we work. So I look forward, and I think we'll have a good summit in South Africa with the participation of the United States and also with President Donald Trump coming to South Africa. I've already invited him for a state visit, and we look forward to welcoming him and all other global leaders.
Kate?
Thank you. I was just about to ask, did he say yes when you spoke to him on the phone, but it sounds like he did. When it comes to Russia and Ukraine, it seems to have escalated in the last 24 hours. Do you have a reaction to the Russians revising their nuclear doctrine and the US allowing Ukraine to use long-range weapons?
Well, the developments that have been unfolding just in the past few hours and a few days are concerning. They are concerning all round, and the issue of utilization of nuclear, it's something that must be seen as calamitous for all of us in the world, and also the increased threat of utilizing long-range missiles and so forth. So it just means that this conflict is escalating to a very dangerous level, and it therefore requires cool heads, because we've been calling for a settlement of that conflict through negotiations, and we think negotiation is the only way out to resolve this conflict. And I've said to both presidents, both President Putin and Zelensky, that all conflicts end in either winning, defeat, or negotiation, and we've got to choose the best way out. And I've always said that the best way out is to negotiate, where sit around the table and find a solution that will accommodate the interests and the concerns that all parties have. And we as South Africa still hope and wish and want to work for the attainment of peace in that area, and also negotiations.
Kemi?
Thank you. Kemi Mshukoya with the African Ambassador, as well as the White House correspondent. Congratulations on the G20 presidency. I know it's a lot of work. It's a huge opportunity for South Africa as well as for the African continent. So can you talk about how you plan to bring in the South African diaspora as well as the African diaspora to support what you're doing, and how you plan to use the platform with the African Continental Free Trade Agreement to make sure that African voices are heard on the global trade platform?
Our approach to the G20 summit is underpinned by inclusivity. We want to include all voices, all views, and all structures as much as we possibly can, and formations. So utilizing or getting or bringing in, say, the South African diaspora will be a wonderful thing that we can do, and we will be inviting them to come and play a role and to contribute. Africa is our home, and we are going to seek to make this G20 an Africa-focused G20, as well as a Global South-focused G20, just as Brazil did. But in our case, it will be our own home, the African continent. We've already made that clear publicly, that is what we want the G20 to focus on the needs and challenges that the African continent faces, but also, as put very, very clearly by President Xi Jinping, the opportunities, because where there are challenges, we must also look on the flip side and say, what are the opportunities? So the Africa Continental Free Trade Area presents a huge opportunity for African economies, and utilizing the G20 platform, we will want all of us on the continent to see how best we can broaden our own participation as countries in the African Continental Free Trade Area and utilize the opportunity that is being brought about by these many countries that control up to 80% of the GDP of the world when it comes to trade, when it comes to economic growth. So we will want that, and the African diaspora has a role to play, and we will be inviting to them. So we're going to also create a platform in which people can make their inputs, both in South Africa, in SADC, our own region, Southern African Community Development Area, as well as the whole entire continent of Africa. So for us, this is a very exciting opportunity. We were not elected, it was just by dint of, the one following the other, but we want to utilize it to good effect, to work with others and to deepen cooperation in the world and focus on the key issues that the world needs to focus on. And in many ways, the G20 creates a platform also of having an impact on the direction the world is taking in certain areas. So that brings that opportunity to us, and we want to utilize it.
Quick follow-up. You met with President Biden briefly. Could you give us any updates or share that conversation that you had with President Biden today?
It was on the trot as we were moving from one place to another. President Biden and I spent a considerable amount of time in a bilateral 2 years ago in the White House, and so we've been able to renew some of those things that we discussed. But the one area that we participated jointly in today was on the issue of workers' rights with President Lula, Da Silva, myself, and President Biden, and we ended up with a clear statement on promotion of workers' rights. And so that, to me, just seals a very good relationship, even as he goes into retirement from being president. So that is a very positive development.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.